And is it working? Working good. I am recording. And but the main Southern strategy though was to do what?
Outlast.
Very good. Yeah, just outlast. Wars are political. If the political will of the North ends, they can fight. Wars are political. Oh, did everyone get? Everyone got? Stay. The extra card. You pick one of those movies, a couple of notes, just a page, turn that edge. I give you a little extra credit. Now we'll give you extra credit if you get it done earlier. Let me put this on there. Yes. I like the sheets of paper. It's like maps of arrow. No. Anything else? How may I help you?
Does it max out at like one movie?
Yeah, it maxes out.
One?
Well, you can watch every one if you want, but you only get credit for one.
Watch every video for your entire work.
So I like them all. There are a few are fantastic. Amistad, but especially 12 Years a Slave. They show it.
Is it 12 Years a Slave movie really like?
Yes, it's very. It's well done.
History class.
What's that?
One history class I had. They didn't count like religious stuff.
Oh, I think Mr. Larson's there.
But
Yeah, it's pretty intense. So that's why you get a note home, get approval. But it's well done. It's very well done. There's another one by the same director called Birth of the Nation about Nat Turner, and I thought about it, but the movie just is not very good. It's just not good. So I didn't include it. All right. So we have McClellan holdout. Oh, the Union was still fighting for what in 1862? Say it again. Yeah, just the Union. It's fighting for Union. So what issue did they were trying to avoid and not address? Slavery and emancipation. Had to keep these states in orange, the border states. I mean, look at Maryland. If Maryland goes to the Confederacy, there's Washington, D.C. Do you see a problem? So it was quite a high wire act, a balancing act for Lincoln. So what did we get to? We here? Is that fast? Did you enjoy that? I kind of done something. I should have said something. So, you have to write this down. Just listen real quick. Here in the Shenandoah Valley, beautiful place. If you ever get a chance, wow. But it's kind of the breadbasket of Virginia. Food, really good for grain crops. A Confederate general by the name of Stonewall Jackson did really well there and defeated armies bigger than him. And so that's going to be, remember him from Battle of Bull Run? This will make his reputation in the Shenandoah. Partially because he was going up against inept generals, including John C. Fremont. But let's get back to here. So here's the Confederate lines. McClellan had a plan to loop around. But McClellan was convinced how big was the Confederate army. Yeah, like twice his size. Which, by the way, what was the reaction of Lincoln when McClellan said, "I'm outnumbered, and if I lose, the Union is over"? He was literally pulling his hair out. He could not comprehend why McClellan would believe something that was so crazy. And of course, McClellan then assumed that Lincoln was an idiot. And he started contemplating that maybe the only thing that will save this country is not just my army, but McClellan becoming a dictator. He starts thinking about it. I'm the only one. I'm the only one smart enough. So he built this great army. He was delusional and now becoming dictatorial. Well, just before he was going to have this plan to loop around, which actually is not a bad plan, Johnston pulled back. And so these Confederate lines, bristling with guns, were opened up. And McClellan's forces took them, and that's what they found. Look at the cannon bristling through the Confederate defenses. What were they? Logs painted black to look like cannons. In fact, this is my favorite one where the guy's acting like he's lighting it. They call them Quaker guns because Quakers are pacifists. Get it? So what does this tell you as rational people? Yeah, the Confederates don't have very many men, right? What did McClellan see? They have more men than I thought. And they're trying to suck me in to an attack where I'll get my armies destroyed. This gives you an idea of what kind of person McClellan was. But McClellan still carried out his plan. He landed down here where there was a Union fort, and he brought 80,000 men to march up towards Richmond. If he moved fast, could pick the battle site, because Johnston's up here, around Fredericksburg. It's a good plan. And this would be called, because you notice it's the James Peninsula. Remember Jamestown? And then Yorktown was the last battle of the Revolutionary War. So pretty historic spot already. This will be called the Peninsula Campaign. And this is one of those great what-ifs in history. What if McClellan had moved fast? The Peninsula Campaign. But you'll notice those two names, the Merrimack and Monitor. Before the campaign could really happen, there was the first ever in the world clash of ironclads. Ironclads means basically they slap iron armor on these ships. The British have been tinkering with this, but the first time this would ever happen. And what happened was, the Merrimack was a U.S. ship, and when they evacuated Norfolk Harbor, the Navy burnt the ship. So it sunk in the harbor, but the hull survived. The Confederates brought it up. They renamed it the Virginia, but no one called it the Virginia. And so they had this hull, wooden hull of a ship, and they slapped boilerplate iron plates on it. And you notice they make it kind of an angle. So the forecastle is kind of triangle, so cannonballs are hit and be deflected off. Well, with black powder, cannonballs couldn't go through it. They didn't move fast enough. So these ships were basically invulnerable to Union guns. Now, the engine was too small, it leaked. They didn't have a good system of exhaust, so the crewmen started literally passing out by carbon monoxide poisoning. But when it sailed out in early March of 1860, my year's right, 1862, right here, it sunk in just a few minutes 3 Union ships. Because they're still using wooden ships. And then it sailed back in, basically because the ship started to leak. They tried to patch it up, and they went out the next day. And who knows what would have happened. But to meet them was a ship that just arrived called the Monitor. Union spies had picked up what they were going to do. And the Monitor, you notice how it's shaped low in the water? This is an all-iron ship. And on top it has a turret. Instead of guns on the side, and it's hand cranked, but the turret could turn 360 degrees. So it could fire in any area. And then the front, they put a ram, so it could ram into the enemy ship. And it's really low, so there's not a lot to hit. Iron armor. Revolutionary. All modern ships would eventually, in a way, kind of be followed, at least up until after World War II, follow this design with turrets and guns on turrets. They fought a draw for about 3 hours, just blazed away at each other. The cannonballs just bounced off the armor. A few men were wounded by splinters. Both ships began to sink or leak. Carbon monoxide poisoning them both. Yeah.
Show one more time what's happening. I am seeing a lot of shapes, but not a lot of.
This is the Confederate ship called the Merrimack. And this is the Monitor right here. And what the Monitor's doing right there is trying to sail into it to ram it, to sink it.
And that's why it's really low.
It was designed to be really low anyways.
How do they float? It's just made of iron.
Just like the same way any boats float, you know.
Science?
It's science. Yeah. the combination of, floats. They actually had real struggle with these boats, because the engines were so heavy and all, they leak so much, but they could float on, so with the engine, they could move fast enough so it would stay on.
And the little circle thing on top of the.
That's a turret.
That's the thing that shoots.
It could turn. And so it could fire, yeah. There's a cannon sticking out of it.
Thank you.
It was a draw. The Merrimack actually started leaking, and a couple of the men actually died of carbon monoxide poisoning. And so they had to retreat back to the harbor. In fact, the ship was leaking so bad it could never sail out again. And eventually the Confederates had to burn it. So the point is, not that the ship was, that this battle changed the battle itself, the outcome didn't really change much of the battle. But two ironclads would totally forever change the way militaries and how important economies were to militaries would be for the rest of all history. What matters in war, more than ever before, it's not tactics, it's not even training, it's industry and technology. If you have the industry to build iron and then in the next century steel armor, better engine, and technology to make new weapons, you will win in wars. What is the term? The business term where one company has a competitive advantage because it is bigger and can be more efficient. This economies of scale works for countries and military too. It doesn't matter how brave you are. If somebody else has better technology and more industry, they can outproduce you and defeat you. You really notice this at the end of the century when European powers, because they're technologically advanced, like the British are going to soon make a bunch of these, they're going to conquer Africa. Just take it. Not because the people there weren't brave and intelligent, they didn't have the technology. World War II, the United States did not win because of its army. Or the army actually was really weak with actually really pretty bad training. Poor guys. But we built a lot of stuff. Mediocre tanks, but a lot of them. Really good artillery, lots of trucks, spam. That was a big deal. I know. Great airplanes. No one can match us. And today we are still living off of that. What gives the United States military advantage is technology and industry. Actually, more technology now, because we don't build that much stuff anymore. It might be bad if a potential enemy cuts off that trade. This is what we call potential foreshadowing. Moving on. Potential foreshadowing, I like that. So, industry. So whoever can make the most can conquer this valley and defeat the... Now what? Scooby. So, as you can see, okay, I like maps with arrows. So McClellan landed here in the middle of March. The Merrimack and Monitor was spot right here. And they begin to move up the peninsula. As you can imagine, knowing McClellan, he moved how fast? So the Confederates had built a massive trench line from Yorktown actually to Jamestown. And so that's why this is like one of the most historic spots in American history. You got the big Civil War battle, Jamestown, Yorktown. And when he got to this line, McClellan assumed, oh my God, there must be 100,000 men there. Well, of course, there were less than 10,000 men. But he refused to believe it. And in fact, the Confederates did all kinds of tricks to convince McClellan that they had more men. Like, for example, there's a train station right here. They just had a locomotive just out of sight of Union forces, but they could hear it come into the station, billow out steam, so they could see the steam over the horizon, and then blow the whistles. So it made the Union forces think all these reinforcements are arriving. They didn't yell fake orders to fake men. They back up the train, wait 10 minutes, and do it again. But my favorite is, along these trenches, they had so few men. They had men walking, and they were carrying like a pole. And I drew it right here. So imagine a pole. I drew through my hand, I know. This great work of art is now gone. Imagine a pole with another pole across like that. And then they nailed rifles, with old rifles with bayonets on. So there's a whole line of them. So it looked like and then they walked on the trenches. So all you can see are the bayonets sticking out. They just walked by. And they bought it. McClellan, instead of attacking right away, he moved up slowly, brought up siege weapons, these big mortars right here. This is a funny picture. This is actually from the Peninsula Campaign of Union soldiers playing cards while waiting. And just before McClellan finally decided to attack, what did the Confederates do? Pulled back. And so instead of being at Richmond in a month, it would be 2 months before he finally got there. And by then, Johnson was waiting. I should add one more thing. The Intrepid was a hot air balloon that McClellan used. He was smart in some ways. This is a clever use. They talked about this in the Crimean War, which happened in the Black Sea earlier. The U.S. wasn't involved. And he used it. And they had to go up on a rope, and they would drop messages down. They would tie it to a beanbag and then drop them down. Good idea, aerial reconnaissance. But I think you might see the problem. 2 problems. Wind, and yeah, a couple holes that hot air balloons show their flaw. And so they didn't use it that much, but the only reason I'm mentioning is this really caught the imagination. So you're going to see all kinds of pictures of Civil War battles and of this balloon floating above. And they weren't even using it. World War I, they used all kinds of balloons. They were actually a big deal. The Germans had them with their balloons, and they didn't have helium, so they used hydrogen. I'll let you ponder the outcome of that. Volunteers for the balloon service, anyone? Well, eventually, after 2 months, McClellan pushed his way to the gates of Richmond. He didn't have enough men to surround it, but there's Johnson's line, and there's McClellan. It looks like by the end of May, just a matter of time. I mean, it's just, the optimism was overwhelming in the North. Boy, this was easy. Bull Run was bad, but we're winning. And then what happened? Well, the Confederates counterattacked. Johnson felt he had no choice but to try to strike back, with Richmond just at his back. In one of the most confusing battles of the war, it's called Fair Oaks or Seven Pines, 2 names, end of May 1932, 1862. Nobody had commanded armies this size. The Confederates had about 70,000 men. They'd been reinforced with everybody they could find. The Union Army was over 100,000 men. Units got lost. There are some areas, and this picture kind of shows it, where Confederate forces were literally feet away from Union forces, blazing away at each other's faces. But unlike the Revolutionary War, these weapons now were accurate to over 150 yards. And so the casualties were just appalling. And you also notice the uniforms. Okay, you always say the gray, and a few officers had gray, but most of the men either wore what they had on, whatever clothes they could find, and they might dye them, find a dye from the butternut tree, so they could squeeze this nut, this butternut, and it would come out kind of a brownish color. So the Confederates are more brown, and whatever clothes they had, they just dye brown if they could. That's your hat's about as close as we're going to get. That's pretty close. We are cold. I bet you have to think about it. So, by the way, you see the flag of the Confederacy. The Confederate battle flag, you won't see in paintings till the next year. Casualties were unreal. Remember, casualties killed, wounded, or missing. Now, I'm just going to give you the number. You don't need to know the number. I just want to give you the idea of how bloody this thing was. So this one-day battle, by the way, Bull Run, that was about just under 5,000 casualties. This battle, I have to find the exact number, just under 12,000 casualties. 6,000 of them were Confederate. You get the point, a bloody affair. One of the casualties was Johnson. He took a musket ball, they called mini balls or mini balls after the French inventor, hit him right here. Now the thing about being hit right here, I know that's horrible. I don't want to contemplate it, but if it was a little bit higher into his guts, he would have gone. There's nothing they could do. It was just low enough that it missed his guts. He survived. He'd be bedridden for almost 8 months. He would live for another 17 years, and we're not done with it. And using the terminology of the day, it would leak for the rest of his life. Well, Davis now had to choose a successor. Johnston was very good, but cautious over the absolute, not just objections, outrage of advisors and other generals. Jefferson Davis chose Robert E. Lee, who everybody thought was too old. In fact, they called him, when he first took command, Old Granny Lee. Which, by the way, he was late 50s, but I was pretty, but he had been in the Army for a long time. It's tough on his life. But Old Granny Lee, they didn't want him. Yeah. Jefferson Davis. Now, and he seemed to confirm their suspicions because he had them deep trenches right away. We want to fight! But he dubbed his army the Army of Northern Virginia. So that would be the two big armies of the war. The Army of the Potomac versus the Army of Northern Virginia. And I like these two pictures of soldiers from the Army of Northern Virginia because you can see how they're dressed. You know, you can tell the butternut on some, they're whatever clothes they had, like just a flannel shirt. You know, I like this officer with just a, you know, he's got a suit on. I think that's awesome. The Army of Northern Virginia. And shocking everybody, we have them dig trenches and then counterattack. With an army that's almost half as big, he counterattacked, and this would lead to a series of battles that we call, that's luck what happened because it lasted 7 days, the 7 days. Now, McClellan's line was like this. Excuse me, I need a drink. Talking through a mask. Start breathing in the mask, you know. That's some good water. I like the best part, looking at your eyes, watching me, some of that.
Like, wow, water never.
So, with that, well, that water was wet. Okay, moving on. The thing was, same thing happened. Men got lost. The attack didn't go very well. And in fact, the first battle right here at Mechanicsville, you don't know the name, just 7 days. It was a Union victory. The Confederates were retreated in disarray. But what did McClellan think? He must have 200,000, 250,000 men. My army's about to be overwhelmed. And what did he do? He retreated. They won and retreated. The next battle, won and retreated. The Union won and retreated. His subordinate generals like Phil Kearny and others, please, no, we're winning. He refused to believe it and kept retreating. Kept retreating. In fact, right here, he was retreating so fast at Savage Station that his overextended lines were nearly cut in two by a Confederate attack, and Lee might have won the war right there. Politically, it would have been hard to come back from that. Fortunately, Lee's army didn't attack when he was supposed to. It was under Stonewall Jackson, who decided that he was tired and fell asleep under a tree. And his men just stood there and didn't attack. He was a weird guy, too. In fact, the last battle of Malvern Hill, do you remember that name of that, the weapon they would shoot out of cannon? Not grape shot, but the other one I told you about from the Mexican War? Canister. But it was like a shotgun, like a can full of 200 to 300 musket balls. Confederate forces charged in lines into Union cannon firing canister, and they were literally blown to pieces. And McClellan retreated again. In fact, he ran away to a place on the on the James River called Harrison's Landing right there and bottled himself in because it was surrounded by hills. The 7 days would change the entire course. He was at Harrison's Landing. All Lee had to do was just go in the hills and watch him. In 7 days, it went from the Union Army, like the inevitable taking of Richmond, to defeat and bottled up. Lee's actions changed the entire course of the war. And overnight, Lee, the attitude the men had changed, and he was so audacious. No one could believe what he would do. And he still is outnumbered 2-1. And Lincoln is furious. Do something! Attack! Lincoln would actually sail down to Harrison's Landing and beg McClellan to move that summer. And McClellan proceeded to lecture Lincoln on what a bad president he was, and that perhaps McClellan should become president. In fact, that's where Lincoln would make his famous statement to McClellan, "If you're not using your army, may I borrow it for a little while?" But Lincoln was afraid to fire him. He was worried if he fired McClellan, what would McClellan's army do? March on D.C., make McClellan dictator. What a time, huh? I mean, what a time. So instead of firing McClellan, he began to funnel reinforcements and men away from McClellan and created a new army up here. Which is not a great idea. It shows you how desperate things were. I mean, this is just desperation. This new army would be called the Army of Virginia. Under a general who won a little victory, he took a Confederate fort on the Mississippi here, named John Pope, who immediately announced, "I will destroy the Confederacy and hang all the traitors," which infuriated Lee. Now, I'm not going to go into details of the next battle. I mean, this is a really complex battle. But Pope basically marched down towards Richmond. There's Pope. You see all gonna look like Napoleon. The next battle, and it's luck would have it, it's going to be fought in the same battle site as the first major battle. So to be convenient, it'll be the second Bull Run or second Manassas. This is such a confusing, bloody battle. I mean, wow, was it a confusing battle. I've been here a couple times, and it's been so overgrown with trees. You literally you go, like this big battle pond, you're kind of in this middle of this forest now that's all grown since. You have no idea what happened. Yeah.
So John Pope. Okay, and his army was the Army of Virginia.
Yeah, Army of Virginia. It'll only be here for a month.
But Robert Lee's was Army of Northern.
Yes, but he's Confederate.
So what was Virginia itself as a state? Was it Union or Confederate?
Confederate. The capital of Virginia, Richmond, is the capital of the Confederacy.
So then why did John Pope call his army the Army of Virginia?
We're taking Virginia back. That's what it meant. So, all I gotta say, you hear Pope march down, and what Lee did is, Lee just said, McClellan's doing nothing down here. I'm gonna leave him. And McClellan did nothing. And he basically divided his forces up and swung around Pope and just totally baffled him. Pope didn't know what the heck hit him. And I know what you're thinking, I don't quite understand the battle. So here's the West Point Atlas map to give you a very easy version of the battle. Do I need to explain anything? That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Actually, it was a really confusing battle. But at the end of these 3 days, Pope was outflanked, outfought, and a big Confederate victory. Everyone got that? Another big one. Now, his army did not run away after the first Bull Run. And a lot of Pope's generals, in fact, many of them were the same ones who were at McClellan at the 7 days, because they reinforced him, were saying, no, we're fine. Let's counterattack. We can still fight. And Pope refused. In fact, Pope would disappear. Lincoln would fire him, and he would go up to Minnesota to fight against the Lakota Sioux. And so we have McDowell, McClellan, Pope. By the way, the best Union general of the war, probably, would have been the best, was killed after this battle. Phil Kearny. Lost an arm fighting with the French in Algeria. He was out to scout the Confederate line wanting to counterattack, and as he was riding towards Union lines after scouting them in the dark, Union pickets, which means scouts, saw this shadowy figure, and what did they do? So they shot his own men. This is what we call actual foreshadowing. Someone might know what's going to happen. That's Kearny's statue where he died. That's Kearny's statue at Arlington National Cemetery. It's one of the great what-ifs in history. He was a pretty amazing general. We'll never know. So now what? Lee is sitting right here with 40,000 men. Actually, less than 40,000. All these wounded. This area has been picked clean of any food or forage for horses. He's sitting up here. Half his men don't have shoes. Right here. But they just won 2 massive victories. What you can do? Now, the best Confederate strategy was to hold out. Fight a defensive battle with the Union, beat their heads against the Confederacy, and then just say, we've had enough. Lee wants to win the whole thing right now. So what does he decide to do? Invade the North. He's going to invade. So Lee invades. Here's his men crossing the Potomac. He can get supplies, and if he can get up into Pennsylvania, which is true free Union territory, and win a battle, that might do 2 things. It might bring Britain into the war. And there's midterm elections coming up in the North. If the Republicans do poorly, they can win the war. But the big thing is Britain. The war is still about Union, and Britain might enter, and if Britain can enter. What was the battle that brought the French into the war? You remember that battle? Revolutionary War. Yeah, Saratoga. That's what he's hoping for. Is this a good plan? Oof. And in fact, he saw the supplies. He divides his already small army up into groups to get supplies, to get bases. That was, he has plenty of time to link them back together. Now speaking of linking, what about Lincoln? That summer went from optimism to disaster. Lincoln is still fighting, the Union is still fighting for Union. But he realizes by that summer, that might not be enough. Few men are volunteering now. People are growing tired of the war and the unbelievable casualties. Oh, I didn't tell you the casualties for the 7 days, did I? Just listen to the casualties. You didn't write down, just listen. The 7 days battle, 37,000 casualties. Split both ways, almost even. The battle, the second Manassas, or second Bull Run, about 2.5 days, 27,000 casualties. You're leaving? You see how bloody this is? By the way, who can't afford those losses? Both sides can't really, but one side really can't afford them.
The 7th.
Yeah. And this is pre-high explosives. This is still black powder. That actually makes it almost, I mean, it's all horrible, but it's that so much more terrifying. So Lincoln decides this isn't enough. I'm going to have to widen the war. The war needs another cause. And what is that cause? Emancipation. Freedom of the slaves. The problem is, if he says, I'm going to emancipate slaves in areas in rebellion, which he has the power to do, after a number of big losses, it makes Lincoln look what? It doesn't look desperate if he does that. Lincoln needs a what? A victory. Lincoln needs a victory. He needs a victory. What a moment. Lee is invading North to win a victory, maybe get Britain into the war, change the election, and the war is still about Union. Lincoln's thinking about widening the war, and therefore, literally, this is not just changing the war. This is changing the United States. What a moment. And this you get to one thing. Despite what anybody says, all wars, the decision to fight, it's all political. It's all political. Wars are political. These are political decisions. And if you ever hear anybody say, let the generals fight, that was a big deal, let's say like the Vietnam War. You let the generals make the decisions, not politicians. That's a political decision to say basically, we want to fight this war in this way. They're misleading people. All wars are political. So Pope's gone. Who's going to command the 100,000 or so troops gathering around Washington, D.C.? Lincoln now needs a victory. Who does he pick? Who will come in? Any guesses? I heard yes. Grant? No. Anyone?
Yeah.
McClellan! So McClellan's back in command.
Fine. I don't know how to question myself.
He thought he had no choice. And the men were overjoyed because they loved McClellan because he made them feel proud of themselves as an army. I know.
So how is it?
But you'll find out something. Men have no idea what's going on during the war.
Just men in general?
Well, men in general usually don't either. But
Oh.
no, men in war, soldiers have no idea what's going on. They have no idea. To this day, they have no idea. They have other things on their mind, obviously. And, they don't know the tactics. They don't have any idea. It doesn't mean they're not really smart people or dumb people. That's not the point. They just don't know to this day. So as soldiers, what's going on in combat today, they really don't know, most of them. Not because they're not smart, that's not what, soldiers aren't told anything. As soldiers, trust me, they have no idea what's going on. Well, we're coming to the bloodiest day in American history. And I would say the most important battle in American history. And it doesn't necessarily deciding the war, but this would change everything. The Battle of Antietam. Now, there's a town there near called Sharpsburg. So the Confederates would call this Sharpsburg at first, but everybody calls this Antietam. There's Antietam Creek. The bloodiest day in American history to this day. To this day. More men were killed or wounded here than any other day in American history. They thought September 11th might be worse, but fortunately not enough people were either not in the Twin Towers or got out. But that's the second. So what happened was this. From this easy to follow West Point map, you can see everything you need to know about the battle. Okay, I love maps like this. So to me, it's kind of normal, but if you just look at this and your mind's not really set to look at maps like this, it doesn't do you much good, does it? But let me explain one thing real quick. Here's Washington, D.C. Everyone see that? Here's the Potomac River. So Manassas was down here. Lee is going up here, and he's going to divide his forces up. McClellan begins to move, and how fast did he move once he took command? Slow. But they're going over the same campsites that Confederates were at. The very same site. They're actually sometimes using the same fire rings that Confederate soldiers had cooked their salt pork 2 days earlier, or brewed their fake coffee. The Confederates couldn't get coffee, so they had fake coffee, like chickpeas, and they would roast them. Here are actually Confederate forces going through Hagerstown, Maryland on that march. That's an amazing picture because these kind of cannon shots are really hard to take. You see a little bit of the motion, and you see they put all their gear in a blanket and wrapped it around their shoulders. So you can see that. They didn't have backs. Most of them didn't have knapsacks. They didn't have bindles, not like a stick in a bindle. They just wrapped it in a blanket and just kind of tied it around their shoulders.
So they just like
A bindle, I like that. And well, at one of these campfires, 2 days later, a group of Union soldiers were brewing up their coffee. Coffee was like everything. The men would brew coffee. They'd stop fires going to brewing coffee. If they couldn't start a fire, they'd chew on the coffee beans. They'd have the caffeine. Well, they're brewing it up, and somebody found something that was really hard to find, as you can imagine, because of the war. 3 cigars. 3 cigars. And what were they? Yeah, there's a piece of paper wrapped around. And it's shocking they didn't just throw that paper into the fire. And they opened the plans up, and they were all Lee's plans how he divided his forces. A staff officer of Lee's wanted a souvenir, so he copied it so he could save it after the glorious, victorious campaign. They kept it, and the scars. And they've been involved since morning. And the guys in McClellan. And what did McClellan do when he saw this? Now you think McClellan would be like, no way, it's a plot, it's a trap. He believed it. And he actually kind of moved fast. He had a shot to attack Lee's divided army, and this could have changed the entire course of history. And let's put it this way, if he would have destroyed Lee's army, we would have had a President McClellan. I guarantee it. We almost did anyways. And so he advanced quickly, but there's this long line of mountains that's called South Mountain. The Appalachian Mountains, these long lines. And it's really pretty, lots of little streams and grass. I almost got run over by a truck here. It was a lot of fun. Last time I was there, it was really, really foggy. Couldn't see 5 feet in front of us, and we had to pull over. And I foolishly opened the door, and a truck went right. No, I had shut the door, and I was standing like this against the car, and right back. It was probably 5 feet away, but it felt like 5 inches. And this is going to be South Mountain. And McClellan saw this, and he had to push his men over the pass. And this is where McClellan was going to become McClellan. Instead of overwhelming the few thousand cavalrymen holding it, he delayed and didn't quite push aggressively enough. And when Lee realized this, he was able to gather his forces. It gave Lee a day to gather what forces he had to defend Antigua, Charlottesville. If he would have pushed through aggressively, McClellan would have got in between Lee's divided forces, entirely different course of history. This is where the Black Hat Boys, the Iron Brigade, would fight. But this is where we get to the Battle of Antietam. And Lee had about 30,000 men. There are still a few men. Remember Harper's Ferry? He had about 10,000 men taking Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry is down here. Here's the Potomac. Here's Sharpsburg. His men formed a little circle around it. Here's the creek. So McClellan came up to this. Now McClellan he's getting reinforced, but he had about 80,000 men with him at the beginning of the battle. 3 more than 2 to 1. But McClellan thought Lee had what? Okay. So McClellan's going to keep a third of his army in reserve and will never fight. Another pull your hair out moment. So he had this right here. So McClellan decided and came up with a pretty good plan. Early in the morning on the 17th, attack here. Hard. What will Lee have to do? Shift forces over, then attack here. Shift forces over, and then attack the weakened side. It's a pretty good plan, isn't it? That's McClellan's plan. Now Lee, knowing the reality of it, what's his plan? Just hold out. If he's defeated, he can't retreat. There's a river here. He's stuck. It's all or nothing. This is why it's such an important battle. The winner of this battle, whoever wins this battle, could change the entire course of American history. If you ever get a chance to go to a battlefield, Civil War battlefield, and I like these, so I've been to a lot. I've been to this 3 times. This is the best one I've been to. Gettysburg has just mounds of people there. This one, there's not near as many. So the first day of the battle would be dubbed the Cornfield. There's this big cornfield. So early on, Union forces attacked. And this is from this movie shown at there. Reenactors go there every year. I'll tell you really quick, then I'll finish it tomorrow. And then hopefully everything goes right, then we'll start the video tomorrow. There is a slight chance I might be gone on Friday. Could be, yes. No, I don't like to miss. It's for my retirement. See you tomorrow!
So you want the DBQ and the
outline, yes. And you guys done, no sweats?
Yeah.
Feel pretty good about it?
Yeah, I think I know. I wrote one last night.